My name is Nora Ellison, and I am 38 years old. Not long ago, I sat at the respondent's table in a county courtroom while a lawyer in a suit worth more than my monthly rent called me a kidnapper, and the 3 children I had raised for 12 years were listed as my victims. Across the aisle, my sister cried into a tissue she never actually used. 12 years earlier, she had pulled into my driveway, unbuckled her children, and asked me for one single hour. Just one. I gave her 12 years of fevers, packed lunches, and midnight nightmares. She gave me a head start and disappeared. Now she was back, freshly styled, with a lawyer and a petition claiming I had stolen her family from her. But none of them knew what was sitting at the bottom of my bag beneath my checkbook, a sealed envelope, 11 years old, never opened, with a city written across the corner. What happened when the judge finally opened it, what he asked me, and what I said back, I promise that part is coming. Welcome back to Quiet Storm Confessions, where soft-spoken women tell the loudest stories of their lives, stories about family, betrayal, and the people who choose to stay no matter what it costs them. If this story touches something familiar, leave a comment below and subscribe so you do not miss what a woman like me finally does when she stops staying quiet. Let me take you back 12 years to a Saturday morning in June. I was 26 then, renting a small worn-down house on Maple Row, working night shifts at a diner, saving every tip toward culinary school. My sister Vanessa pulled her minivan into my driveway at 9:15 that morning, the engine coughing. She was 31, a widow of just over a year, and she came up my walkway holding baby Ivy on her hip like a bag she was tired of carrying. Ivy was barely 1 year old and running a low fever. Miles was 3 and half asleep on his feet. Callie was 5, already old enough to be holding everyone else's shoes. Behind him, Vanessa dragged 2 garbage bags stuffed with clothes and dropped them on my porch the way someone drops off donations they no longer want. She smelled like cigarettes and vanilla lotion, and her eyes kept drifting back toward the van. She told me she had an appointment she could not miss and could not bring the kids to. Then she pushed the diaper bag into my arms and gave me the same smile that had gotten her out of trouble since we were children. Just 1 hour. Nora, I swear. I asked what kind of appointment starts on a Saturday morning. She was already walking backward down the steps. Callie waved at the van until it disappeared around the corner, then asked if there were any popsicles, and there were, and that became our entire afternoon. Popsicles, cartoons, and a fever that finally broke by 4 in the afternoon. At 6 I called Vanessa. At 7 I called again. By 10 that night, I was standing at my front window with Ivy asleep against my shoulder, watching every set of headlights come up the street and keep on going. By Sunday, her voicemail was full. By Monday, it would not even ring. I called the police, and a tired officer explained that adults are legally allowed to disappear, that leaving children with family is not a crime, and to call back only if I found signs of foul play. The only foul play I found was inside her apartment. Her landlord let me in on Tuesday because she owed him rent, and he hoped I would cover it. The apartment was not ransacked. It was simply empty. Closets bare, hangers gone, even the crib already sold on a classified site. A neighbor told me a moving truck had come the Thursday before, meaning she had packed up her entire life while I was working a double shift, then driven her children to my porch like the final stop on a moving checklist. My mother, Ruth, sat in my kitchen that week with her hands folded and said the same thing she would keep saying for years. She will come back, Nora. She is their mother. She said it like a law of nature, something foolish to question. I wanted to believe her. Vanessa's husband had died in a highway accident 13 months earlier, and grief does strange things to people, I told myself while buying a used car seat at a yard sale. Then one night, while tucking Callie into a fold-out couch in a room still cluttered with my old cookbooks, she looked up and asked if we had done something wrong. I told her no, someone did something wrong, but it was never her. People ask how I raised 3 children overnight with no warning, and the honest answer is badly, then less badly, then one day you realize an entire year has passed. I put my culinary school application in a drawer and picked up every extra shift the diner would give me. I learned Ivy only slept with the dryer running. I learned Miles wheezed when he cried too hard and that a nebulizer costs real money, even with a coupon. I learned that shame is a luxury item, so I stopped buying it, and I signed us up for assistance and stood in line behind women exactly as tired as I was, and none of them ever asked where their mother had gone. My mother helped when she could, watching the kids on my late nights, loving them deeply, but her generation had rules about airing family troubles, so for a while even the children believed some soft version of the truth, that their mother was simply traveling. The first real obstacle was not money. It was a clipboard, kindergarten registration for Miles, one line asking for the signature of parent or legal guardian. I stood in that office holding a pen I had no legal right to use. The secretary was kind. She had seen this before, aunts, grandmothers, older sisters, but she told me gently that I would need paperwork, and paperwork required my sister. That clipboard was a warning. The emergency room 14 months later was the verdict. Miles, 4 years old by then, developed a chest cold that turned dangerous at 2 a.m, his ribs pulling with every breath. I rushed him in, and somewhere between triage and treatment, a nurse asked if I was his mother.
No.
His legal guardian.
No.
They treated him anyway, because that is what emergency rooms do. But a hospital social worker found me in the hallway at 4 a.m. with a folder and a gentle voice, explaining plainly that I had no legal standing at all, could not consent to surgery, could not enroll them in school, insure them, or protect them, and that if the wrong phone call was ever made, the county could remove all 3 children into foster care while the system decided what I even was to them. I sat in my car in the parking garage as the sun rose and made the first cold decision of my life. I hired a lawyer that Monday. She told me the cleanest path was legal custody through juvenile court, and the cleanest version of that path ran directly through my sister's signature. Since no one had heard from Vanessa in 14 months, I hired a private investigator too, paying half up front. 9 days later, he found her working at a lounge outside a neighboring state under her maiden name. I emptied my culinary school savings, took 2 days off, and drove hundreds of miles to meet her at a motel because she did not want me seeing where she actually lived. She looked both better and worse, new nails, an expensive jacket, and eyes that had already checked out of our family completely. I laid the custody consent papers on the small table by the window, a notary already arranged for 3 that afternoon. Vanessa flipped through the pages like a menu. She never asked about Ivy's fever or Miles's lungs or whether Callie still carried everyone's shoes. She asked what was in it for her. I will say only this much for now. There was a price, and she wrote it herself on motel stationery in the same looping handwriting our mother always praised. I read what she wrote, and something inside me went quiet and never got loud again. I paid it. The notary came at 3, watched her sign, stamped the seal, and while I slid the folder into my bag, Vanessa lit a cigarette and told me I had always wanted to play house with her kids, and congratulations, now I had them. I told her the plain truth on my way out the door, that I was not playing anything, I was simply the one who stayed. Then I drove home through the night with a folder on my passenger seat worth more than my car, and stood in the doorway of the children's room just listening to them breathe. Juvenile court granted me legal custody that fall, and the next 10 years passed the way bread rises, slowly, then all at once. I want to be honest, I did try to close that door for good. 5 years in, I filed to terminate Vanessa's parental rights so I could adopt the children outright. It cost $4,000 in fees and died on the table when Vanessa hired an hourly lawyer just long enough to object, then vanished again, and the case stalled until it was dismissed for lack of prosecution. The law leaves a door cracked open for mothers, and I learned to sleep beside that cracked door. Life became good anyway. I opened a small bakery called Golden Wren 6 years ago with a small business loan and a secondhand mixer I named Gladys. I bought the house on Maple Row 5 years ago, the same house, because the children had already survived enough moving. I packed roughly 4,000 lunches. I sat through stomach flus, a broken wrist, 2 science fairs, and one middle school heartbreak that required emergency pancakes at midnight. The kids called me Noor, and I never once asked for anything more than that. And every June, without fail, one blank postcard appeared in my mailbox. No signature, no message, sometimes a beach, sometimes a casino, sometimes snowy mountains. The first one frightened me enough to call my lawyer, but there was nothing to be done about a blank rectangle of cardstock. So I stopped showing anyone, kept them bundled in a rubber band in the junk drawer, and tried not to think too hard about what it meant that someone out there still knew our address. 8 months ago, my mother had a stroke at her kitchen table with a crossword half finished, and the kettle still warm. She was 71. At her funeral, Ivy held my hand so tightly it left a mark on my ring finger, and I kept thinking my mother died still believing her other daughter would walk in late, the way she was always late to everything. She never came. Her will was simple and shocked no one who had watched her final years, the old farmhouse on the edge of town, and just over $300,000 in insurance, along with a lifetime of frugal savings, all placed into a trust for her 3 grandchildren for college, for their future. I was named trustee. Vanessa's name appeared exactly once, in the kind of sentence lawyers write when someone has been considered and deliberately excluded. Probate law is thorough. An estate must notify every heir, even the missing ones, so a formal notice was mailed to Vanessa's last known address, forwarded who knows how many times, like a flare fired over an empty ocean. Nothing came back. I finished probating the estate, mowed the farmhouse lawn myself, kept the trust records clean enough to eat off, and let myself believe the flare had finally sunk for good. Then on a Tuesday morning in March, a rental car parked outside my bakery, and a woman in a white coat and sunglasses stepped out, and my hands recognized her before my eyes did, going cold against the proofing pans. 12 years, not one phone call, not one birthday card, not a single word at our mother's grave, and she walked through my door like a customer and said hello, Noor. She looked expensive and rented all at once, just like the car. Under the salon polish, she was still my sister, same chin, same tilt of the head when she wanted something. She told me she had been sick, that she was better now, finally in a place where she could give her children what they needed, that she thought about them every single day. I looked at her fresh manicure while she said it, and thought of the junk drawer full of blank postcards, and I asked her only one question: where were you when our mother was buried? She blinked, and for half a second the performance faltered before she chose not to answer, leaning instead over my counter to say plainly that she wanted her babies back. I told her the children had school, routines, and an entire life, and that none of it would be renegotiated over my pastry case, that if she wanted to talk there were proper legal channels. Her smile dried up instantly, and she told me I would be hearing from someone soon, and a week later I did. A process server, apologizing twice, delivered papers stacked like layers of a bad cake. The first was a petition demanding custody of Miles and Ivy and dragging me into court over Callie's senior year, filed by a lawyer named Martin Voss whose language read like tabloid headlines, claiming my custody had come through a forged consent, that the signature I drove hundreds of miles to obtain was fake, calling 12 years of raising these children a wrongful retention, and in one paragraph clearly written for the local newspaper to quote, using the word kidnapping. The second filing arrived the same week at the courthouse, a challenge to our mothers while claiming I had poisoned a dying woman's mind against her firstborn daughter, and that filing told me the real truth, because if the will fell, the trust fell with it, and if our mother died without a valid will, her estate would split evenly between her two daughters, leaving the children with nothing while Vanessa collected half the farmhouse and half the insurance money. The custody case was the emotional performance. The will case was the actual target. A sheriff's deputy parked outside my bakery days later to ask polite questions about custodial interference, and though he closed the complaint within a week, half the town watched that patrol car sit outside my shop for an entire lunch rush. I told the children on a Sunday night over dinner, keeping my voice as level as reading a recipe, that their mother was back in town and had asked the court to review where they lived, that grown-ups would handle the process and nothing about tomorrow would change. The children did not stay level. Miles, 15, shoved back from the table hard enough to hit the wall and stormed out to shoot baskets in the dark until the neighbor's porch light clicked on. Ivy, 13, went the opposite direction, going very still, her ears turning pink, asking quietly if their mother wanted to meet them, and there was hope in her voice, hope with no guardrails, because she had been only 1 year old when the van drove away and her mother existed only as a story other people told. Callie, 17, arms folded, watched me the entire time like a card player reading a bluff, and once the younger two had gone, she stacked the plates and, without looking up, asked why their mother had actually left. I gave her the same smoothed-over answer I had used for a decade, that she got lost. Honey, some people get lost. Callie set the last plate down carefully, like it might go off, and told me she was not 5 anymore. She went upstairs, and I stood at the sink with cold dishwater, understanding 2 things at once: that my children were about to be fought over in public, and that the protective story I had built around them had already begun rotting beneath the floorboards. The first hearing lasted 40 minutes, and Voss performed through 35 of them, standing before Judge Alan Whitfield and calling my entire life a slow-motion kidnapping. My lawyer, Carmen Reyes, entered the custody order into the record along with the deputy's closed complaint, ending the criminal accusations in a single motion, since no one can steal what a court legally granted. But civil court plays by different rules, and Voss knew it well. His forgery claim did exactly what it was designed to do, because a signature cannot defend itself. It simply sits on a page while a stranger calls it a lie. The judge ordered a handwriting expert, appointed a guardian ad litem named Priya Anand to represent the children's interests, and because the law leans toward mothers, even ones 12 years late, granted Vanessa's supervised visitation, 2 hours a week at the Family Services Center. 2 hours does not sound like much until you have had every single hour for 12 years, and then it feels like a hole drilled straight through the bottom of a boat. In the parking lot afterward, Carmen asked me the question good lawyers always ask early, whether I had anything else from that day at the motel, anything at all. I told her I had something, but I would rather not use it. She studied me carefully and told me not to lose it, whatever it was. I never told her it had spent 11 years sealed inside a fireproof box, waiting for exactly this moment. The Family Services Center has a playroom with a large observation window built for exactly this purpose, and I stood on the far side of the glass watching my sister meet her own children again. She was magnificent. I say that with a flat voice, because she arrived with gifts that proved she had done her research, the exact sneakers Miles had posted online, a sketchbook with a specific brand of pens Ivy saved up for, a vintage band shirt for Callie from the poster above her bed, because social media becomes a gift registry for anyone shameless enough to use it that way. She cried at the right moments and stopped at the right moments, knowing exactly when to reach forward, and when to let the children come to her instead. Ivy lit up like a struck match, sitting closer and closer, showing her mother drawing after drawing on her phone while Vanessa leaned in, delighted by every swipe. Miles lasted 20 minutes frozen like a statue before slowly thawing, because 15-year-old boys are not built to resist a pretty woman handing them the exact sneakers they wanted and calling them tall. Only Callie stayed cool and upright, answering questions like a witness under oath. What I told no one for weeks was that before Vanessa entered that playroom, I watched her through a second hallway window where she did not know she had an audience, her hands trembling, pressing flat against her coat twice like smoothing a tablecloth. Something in my chest shifted an inch, and I hated it. Then the door opened, the trembling vanished, the smile arrived, and the performance began. Near the end, she leaned close to Callie's ear and whispered something, and on the drive home I asked gently what her mother had said, and Callie only stared out the window and told me nothing. She said nothing, which was clearly not true. Small towns run on simple stories, and there is no simpler story than a mother wanting her babies back. It reached church before it reached me. At the spring potluck, my Aunt Doris, my mother's sister, cornered me by the dessert table holding a casserole in each hand and certainty to spare, announcing loudly enough for half the tables to hear that Vanessa was their mother, that blood was blood, and what kind of woman keeps children from their own mother? I could have listed 12 years, garbage bags on a porch, a boy wheezing in an emergency room with no one legally allowed to sign for him, but you cannot win against blood is blood in a town like ours. So I picked up my pie server and gave her the only true thing that fit in a single breath, that she was right. I was not their mother. I was simply the one who stayed. It was not meant to win the argument, only to be true. That week the bakery felt the shift. A wedding cake order canceled by voicemail with no explanation. A few one-star reviews from accounts that had never reviewed anything else. Regulars suddenly taking their coffee across the street without meeting my eyes. You cannot fight an entire town. A town believes whatever is easiest to carry. Then Carmen called with gravel in her voice, telling me Voss had subpoenaed every trust record, every account, every receipt, that he was not building a custody case anymore. He was conducting an inventory. That night, after the children's doors clicked shut, I took down the gray fireproof box from the top shelf of my closet, where it had lived since the year I became legal guardian. Inside were 3 birth certificates, the custody order with its raised seal, 12 years of receipts, report cards signed on the parent line, a hospital identification bracelet the size of a bangle, and beneath everything, flat against the bottom like a foundation stone, 1 manila envelope sealed with packing tape, a city inked across the corner in my own handwriting. I sat on the edge of my bed holding it under the lamp, and I knew every sentence inside without opening it, the way you know an old scar hidden under your sleeve. Just 1 hour, that is what she said on my porch, and I had been living inside that single hour ever since, the exit sitting in this envelope the entire time. Opening it in a courtroom would not only expose who Vanessa truly was, it would expose the children to it forever, and there are no take-backs on something like that. You cannot unread your own mother's handwriting. I put it back at the bottom, stacked 12 years of paperwork on top, turned the key, and slid the box home behind the blankets. 2 Saturdays later, I saw Callie through the front glass of a diner across town, sitting in a corner booth across from Vanessa, sunglasses on indoors. No caseworker anywhere in sight. Unsupervised contact violating a court order, barely a month old. I told her that then they would hear it from me first, every word, before any courtroom got the chance. We declined the settlement in writing before lunch. Voss's reply came within hours, short even for him, simply saying he would see us at trial and to bring the forgery. I read it twice standing in my empty bakery and felt a door swing shut behind me, the clean sound of a decision that could not be undone. For 11 years, I had guarded a secret. Starting that moment, I was simply early. Priya filed her guardian report the week before trial, stating that the children were deeply bonded to their aunt, whose home was the only one 2 of them had ever known, that removal would be devastating, and recommending the current arrangement continue, but adding one line aimed squarely at me, noting with concern the guardian's persistent lack of transparency with the children regarding their mother's departure. I did not argue with it because you do not argue with a level It simply tells you what is true. 2 nights before trial, Callie announced at dinner she was coming to court, and when I refused, she pointed out correctly that she was 17, that it was a public courtroom, that she had a study day, and that our neighbor could watch the younger two, but no one could watch her. I looked at this girl, taller than me since 15, raised on my cooking and my rules and my silences, and understood the last thing left to protect her from was watching me finally stop protecting her. So I agreed, and ironed her good blouse anyway, and she let me. On the night before trial, I did not sleep, sitting on the edge of my bed with the envelope in my lap, listening through the wall to Ivy's ocean noise machine, running since she was 4 years old, knowing that in 9 hours her mother would die a second kind of death, and I was the one bringing the shovel. The county courtroom smelled like old wood and radiator dust, the ceiling fan clicking on every third rotation. Judge Alan Whitfield presided, the gallery scattered with townspeople who had decided their errands could wait, and in the second row, in her good blouse, sat Callie with folded hands and a straight spine, watching everything. Vanessa took the stand in soft gray and gave the performance of her life, describing an illness, touching her collarbone as she said it, describing years of trying to find her way back to her children, and then, chin trembling at exactly the right frequency, told the judge her younger sister had always wanted what she had come to her at her lowest, waving money, hungry for a family of her own, that I had paid her to disappear, and that when she refused to stay gone I had threatened her, that the signature everyone kept showing around was not even hers. She wept carefully, tissue hovering, and the gallery leaned toward her like plants toward a window, and I understood with cold clarity that she might actually win. Voss turned to the judge with the satisfaction of a man an inch from the finish line, then turned to Carmen and told her the witness was hers. Carmen walked me through the honest record first, the custody order, school records, medical files, 12 years of my signature on every parent line of a child's life. Then Voss took his turn, approaching pleasantly, the way you approach a pie you intend to drop, asking whether I had struggled to build a family of my own, whether I had located his grieving, vulnerable client through a private investigator, whether money had quietly changed hands, building each question one brick higher until he finally asked if it was true that I had bought myself 3 children for $15,000. The fan clicked. I looked at Callie in the second row, my daughter, who had told me at a midnight kitchen table to stop protecting her from her own life, then looked at the judge and heard my own voice come out level, the same voice I use when the ovens catch fire and panic becomes a luxury I cannot afford. "No, sir," I said, "and I would like to enter something into evidence." Voss objected on principle, but Carmen was already at the bench with exhibit list. Respondents Exhibit 14, disclosed weeks earlier, fought over in 2 motions Voss had already lost, sealed by agreement until offered through my own testimony. The judge waved them through and let me speak. It was an envelope, I explained, 11 years old, sealed at a motel outside of city hours from home the very day my sister signed her consent, kept sealed all this time because of what it would cost 3 children to read. The bailiff carried it to the bench, and the courtroom watched it travel like something lit on fire, and I found Vanessa's face while it moved, gone the color of unbaked dough, because for 11 years she had banked entirely on my silence, and she was watching that account finally close. I told the judge she had asked me for 1 hour, but I gave her children 12 years, and the rest of the story now belonged to him. Judge Whitfield opened the envelope unhurried with a letter opener, the way judges do everything. 3 things came out onto the bench. The original notarized consent, its seal raised, signed in blue ink while a notary and I both watched, the exact twin of the copy Voss had spent months calling forged. A wire transfer receipt from the same week, $15,000 drawn from a savings account labeled in my own optimistic handwriting from another lifetime, culinary school. And beneath both, a single sheet of motel stationery. And I watched him read it, knowing every loop of the handwriting because I had read it 10,000 times before sealing the flap. It said simply that she wanted papers, $15,000, and she would sign whatever was put in front of her, telling me not to come looking for her again, to tell them she was dead if that made it easier, signed with a single letter. The courtroom fell into a different kind of silence, the silence of a man behind a bench reading a mother's price list. Judge Whitfield read it twice, folded his glasses, looked at Vanessa for a long moment as she stared toward the exit sign, then looked at me and asked into the quietest room in the state whether they knew. In the second row, my daughter, and I will call her that now because I had earned it, leaned forward. Not yet, I answered. He held my gaze for a moment, something passing between two people who each understood the weight certain paper can carry, then adjourned for lunch, entered the exhibit into the record, and quietly said the afternoon could wait until the family had had its hour. There is a conference room off the courthouse hallway with a wobbly table and a window painted shut, and that is where my family actually happened, more than in any courtroom that day. Our neighbor drove Miles and Ivy over from school when I called, and Callie was already there pacing with her arms crossed. I sat the three of them down, placed copies of everything face down on the table, my hand flat on top, and finally paid the debt I had been running from for 11 years. I told them about the clipboard and the emergency room, about a boy who wheezed, and an aunt who legally did not exist. I told them about the private investigator, the motel, the papers on the little table, the blank postcards arriving every June, our address kept in her pocket the whole time. I told them their mother had asked for money to sign the papers and that I paid it, $15,000, my school, my someday. And I told them why I never said so, because I was afraid they would do the math a lie performs inside a child's mind and decide they had been bought, that love with the receipt behind it was not really love at all. Then I turned the papers over and let them read the stationery themselves, since they would eventually hear it in a court transcript no matter what I did. Ivy made a sound I will hear for the rest of my life and folded into Miles, who held her while staring at the wall, his jaw working silently. Callie read it standing up, twice, then set it down and looked at me, telling me quietly that I had let her spend 12 years wondering what she had done wrong, that I knew and let her wonder anyway, and the quiet hurt worse than any shout could have. I did not defend myself because she was right, and because I finally understood the flaw in the beam holding everything up, that I had not only been protecting them, I had been protecting myself, the version of me that never had to watch their faces do exactly what their faces were doing now. I told the three of them the truth had always belonged to them, that I was sorry, that it took a courtroom to make me brave. Then I slid every copy across the table to Callie and told her she would decide when the younger two read the rest, not me, not a judge, not their mother. Ivy wiped her face on her sleeve and asked the only question left in the world, whether I had ever wanted to give them back, and I told her not for one single hour. The afternoon session lasted only 40 minutes. With the original consent entered into evidence, the notary's seal confirmed, and a handwriting examiner waiting on standby, the forgery claim collapsed from merely weak into something close to perjury with a runway. Voss saw it happening, since lawyers can smell their own malpractice premiums forming in real time, and after a whispered conference his client withdrew the forgery allegation on the record, conceding the signature was hers, which meant conceding the note, which meant conceding the price. Judge Whitfield denied the petition from the bench, entering a finding of abandonment, stating that 12 years without one phone call, $1 or one birthday card was not an illness or an estrangement, but a decision renewed daily, and he said the word decision like a gavel falling. The will contest fell with it, since no one can claim their mother was poisoned against them while their own handwriting sits in the record explaining exactly how she came to be excluded. He looked at Vanessa for a long moment and told her the court had rarely seen a parent better compensated by her own child's guardian than at the price she herself had set. No handcuffs, no dramatic arrest, Life rarely gives you that scene, and by then I no longer needed it. In the hallway afterward, Vanessa passed us with Voss trailing carefully 3 steps behind, slowing when she reached Callie, who stood very straight, holding her grandmother's posture and my ironing, looking at her mother the way you watch weather finally moving off. Vanessa's mouth opened, and whatever was inside it, she swallowed instead, turning to me for 2 seconds where the performance disappeared entirely, and it was simply my sister, tired, 43, holding a purse in both hands, telling me I had always been better at keeping things than she was, even them. Then she walked out through the double doors into the June light, and none of the 3 children moved a single foot in her direction. The clicking fan was louder than their goodbye. 6 weeks later, with the abandonment finding entered and Priya's blessing on file, Carmen filed to terminate Vanessa's parental rights and begin adoption proceedings for Miles and Ivy. No one objected, no one appeared. The certified notices came back signed by a stranger at a mail center out of state. Callie turned 18 that October, aging out of the custody question entirely, until one Sunday night she slid a printout across the kitchen table and asked me to file one for her too, adult adoption, which does legally exist, researched thoroughly the way she researches everything with a dozen browser tabs open, and told me to change her last name while I was at it, then, seeing my face, added quietly that I was not just the one who stayed, I was her mother. The paperwork was just late. It was 12 years late, and I signed it anyway with a hand that did not stay steady, and no one at that table held it against me. The gray box sits on the counter now, unlocked, mostly empty. The originals belong to a court file downtown, and the copies belong to Callie, who keeps them somewhere her siblings cannot stumble across yet, asking Ivy's therapist rather than me when the right time might come, since that decision belongs to her now. We do not keep each other's truths hidden in this house anymore. We simply keep each other. That June, a letter arrived addressed to all 3 children in familiar looping handwriting, postmarked from out of state. I did not open it or screen it. I set it on the kitchen table with the bills, told them what it was, and left the room, and through the door I heard the 3 of them decide together, voices low, 3 children far wiser about their mother than I ever allowed them to be. They placed it in the junk drawer beside the blank postcards and the still ribbon box from the diner, unopened, theirs to decide someday if ever. She asked me for 1 hour 12 years ago on a porch I still sweep every morning. Her hour is finally up, and my children know everything now, and they're still here. If there is one thing to take from these 12 years, let it be this: blood can tell you where you came from, but it is the people who stay, who show up at 4 in the morning with a nebulizer, who tell you the truth even when it costs them the version of themselves they loved best, who tell you where you truly belong.